On August 23, 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed an agreement known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the foreign ministers who negotiated it. Publicly, this was presented as a simple promise that the two nations would not attack each other. But the real significance lay hidden in a secret addition to the pact. This secret part divided Eastern Europe into two zones of influence. According to the agreement, Poland was to be split between Germany and the Soviet Union along carefully drawn lines. The Soviet Union was also given a free hand in the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and eventually Lithuania, while Germany was assured control over Western Poland and other territories. This pact shocked the world, as Nazi Germany and Communist Soviet Union had always portrayed each other as mortal enemies. Ideologically, Hitler and Stalin were opposites, but strategically, they both saw enormous benefits from this deal. Hitler now felt free to attack Poland without fear of Soviet interference, and Stalin saw an opportunity to strengthen Soviet defenses by taking territories in Eastern Europe. In reality, both dictators knew that their agreement was temporary and purely opportunistic. The immediate effect of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was catastrophic for Poland. Within days of signing the agreement, Germany launched a fierce military assault on Poland on September 1, 1939. German forces attacked from the west with overwhelming force, using a tactic known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Polish defenses crumbled rapidly, and the country struggled desperately to resist. Poland, believing it could count on military assistance promised by Britain and France, was soon bitterly disappointed, as neither country was prepared for immediate large-scale warfare. To further justify their brutal invasion, German propaganda falsely accused Poland of mistreating ethnic Germans and conspiring to invade German territory. These fabrications were designed to create an illusion of defensive action rather than aggression. But the true aggression became unmistakably clear when, on September 17, the Soviet Union entered the conflict. Soviet forces invaded from the east, swiftly capturing large parts of eastern Poland. Soviet officials claimed that they were merely protecting ethnic Ukrainians and Belarusians living under Polish rule, but this justification fooled few observers. The invasion was swift and brutal. Polish forces, already severely weakened by the German attack, stood little chance against the massive Soviet military presence. Hundreds of thousands of Polish soldiers, along with officers and civilian officials, were captured and imprisoned. The Polish government quickly collapsed, and the country was effectively wiped off the map, partitioned between two ruthless powers. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was much more than a non-aggression treaty. It was a strategic alliance that laid the foundation for massive human suffering and brutality in Eastern Europe. Both Germany and the Soviet Union acted without regard for the rights or lives of millions of innocent people. Stalin, in particular, viewed Poland's destruction as necessary to secure the Soviet Union's western borders against future attacks. When German troops stormed into Poland on September 1, 1939, chaos spread rapidly across the country. The Polish army fought bravely, but they were no match for the powerful German forces that attacked swiftly and without mercy. Entire cities were bombed, and villages were set on fire. Families fled their homes in panic, not knowing where to go or how to escape the violence. Yet, even as they tried to escape from the west, something even worse was about to happen from the east. On September 17th, just over 2 weeks after Germany attacked, Soviet troops marched into Poland from the eastern border. This move shocked many Poles who did not expect an invasion from both sides. Without a formal declaration of war, the Soviet Union claimed that Poland had already collapsed, and that their intervention was needed to protect people of Ukrainian and Belarusian backgrounds living there. In reality, this was just a cover story. Soviet troops quickly took control of towns, cities, and entire regions. Polish soldiers were trapped between two huge enemy armies and had nowhere left to run. The Soviet forces were brutal from the very beginning. Thousands of Polish soldiers were captured almost immediately. Instead of treating them as regular prisoners of war according to international law, Soviet authorities transferred these soldiers to the secret police, known as the NKVD. This was a clear violation of the Geneva Convention, an international agreement meant to protect prisoners of war. By doing this, the Soviet Union signaled that these Polish prisoners were considered dangerous political enemies rather than soldiers captured in battle. Beyond capturing soldiers, the Soviet authorities began arresting large numbers of Polish civilians. They targeted the educated and influential people in Polish society, including teachers, doctors, engineers, lawyers, journalists, priests, rabbis, and anyone else they saw as potentially resistant to Soviet rule. Whole families were arrested, sometimes in the middle of the night, dragged from their homes, and sent away on crowded trains to remote areas deep inside the Soviet Union. These arrests had one clear aim: to destroy any possibility that the Polish people could organize themselves against Soviet occupation. Life in the occupied territories quickly became unbearable. The Soviet system immediately imposed strict controls on the local population. Poles lost all personal freedoms. People could no longer speak openly, gather publicly, or practice their own culture and traditions freely. Any small act of resistance or complaint was met with severe punishment. The Polish language and cultural institutions were aggressively suppressed, with Soviet officials attempting to erase Poland's national identity entirely. Meanwhile, those Polish soldiers and civilians who had been arrested faced terrible conditions as prisoners. Many were crowded into makeshift camps and prisons. They had little food, no clean water, and terrible sanitation. Illness and disease spread rapidly among prisoners, who received no medical help or medicine. Many suffered from typhoid, dysentery, and tuberculosis, causing thousands to die from preventable diseases. The prisoners tried desperately to survive, clinging to hope that their captivity would soon end. But the Soviet authorities had no intention of freeing these prisoners. Instead, they subjected prisoners to constant interrogations, trying to force them into accepting communist beliefs and loyalty to Stalin. Those who refused, and most did, faced brutal punishment and torture. NKVD officers frequently resorted to extreme violence, hoping to break the spirit of the Polish prisoners. Yet, despite this cruelty, most prisoners refused to surrender their beliefs or cooperate with their captors. Within months, tens of thousands of Polish citizens were trapped in Soviet hands. Among the prisoners were military officers, prominent community leaders, and respected intellectuals. They were held in notorious special camps at Kozelsk, Starobelsk, and Ostashkov, where the most influential Polish figures were concentrated. Kozelsk held many officers, professors, and doctors. Ostashkov primarily held border guards, police officers, and civil officials. Starobelsk imprisoned many high-ranking military officers. All these camps were overcrowded and poorly equipped. Prisoners suffered greatly from the harsh winters, severe hunger, and constant fear of violent treatment. The NKVD kept detailed records on each prisoner, identifying those they considered most dangerous. They feared these people would lead resistance against Soviet control if ever set free. Stalin himself closely monitored these prisoners, recognizing their influence and understanding clearly that their survival threatened his plans. He viewed them not as soldiers or captives, but as obstacles to Soviet rule. These men and women, simply by their identity and influence, became targets for a horrifying plan that the Soviet Union was about to carry out. Thus, the invasion and occupation of Poland was not just a military conquest, it was the deliberate destruction of a nation's ability to resist. Both Germany and the Soviet Union were ruthless in their actions. But the Soviets specifically targeted Poland's cultural and social heart, aiming to eliminate any future possibility of Polish independence or resistance. The captured Polish soldiers and intellectuals remained unaware of their ultimate fate. They endured day after day of harsh conditions, interrogation, torture, and uncertainty. The families left behind waited anxiously for news that never arrived. Little did they know that the worst was still to come. A secret decision made at the highest levels of the Soviet leadership that would seal their tragic fate forever. Despite horrific conditions in camp, physical suffering was not the prisoners' only torment. Soviet authorities subjected them to relentless psychological pressure. Prisoners endured endless interrogations, often lasting hours and sometimes even days without a break. During these interrogations, NKVD officers attempted to force prisoners into admitting false crimes or betray their fellow countrymen. Beyond interrogations, prisoners faced constant political indoctrination. Soviet officials forced them to attend meetings where communist propaganda was drilled into their minds day after day. Prisoners were repeatedly told that Poland was finished, that their homeland no longer existed, and that communism was their only future. Religious beliefs and cultural traditions were strictly forbidden, and prisoners were harshly punished if caught practicing their faith or even celebrating traditional holidays such as Christmas. This effort was not just about punishing prisoners, but about breaking their spirit and erasing their identity. Yet, despite all these tactics, most Polish prisoners remained defiant. They refused to give up their patriotism, their culture, or their religious beliefs. They secretly supported each other, shared food, and comforted the sick. Even in their darkest moments, they found ways to maintain their dignity and solidarity. Prisoners wrote letters, sang patriotic songs quietly, and told stories of better days in Poland. These small acts of resistance infuriated their captors, who saw clearly that the prisoners remained determined and loyal to their country. It was precisely this resistance that terrified Soviet leaders the most. Stalin's government understood that these Polish prisoners were the leaders, thinkers, and military experts who would rebuild and strengthen Poland if they were ever set free. Stalin viewed these men and women as a direct threat to Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. He was determined not to let that happen. In early 1940, the Soviet leadership made a chilling decision. Joseph Stalin himself, along with his closest advisors, signed an official order approving the execution of more than 20,000 Polish prisoners. The document labeled them nationalists and counter-revolutionaries, terms used by the Soviet regime to justify political killings. By using this language, the Soviets tried to disguise murder as a legitimate act of state security. They believed that by eliminating these influential individuals, they would permanently cripple Poland's ability to resist Soviet control. This horrific plan was executed with terrifying efficiency. Prisoners in Kozelsk, Starobelsk, and Ostashkov camps were given false hope that they were finally going to be released or moved somewhere better. But it was a cruel lie. Instead, they were loaded onto trains and trucks, tightly packed and without food or water, and taken to secret locations deep inside Soviet territory. Once they arrived at these secret locations, the prisoners faced their final moments. They were led to execution sites, where Soviet soldiers methodically carried out mass killings. Most prisoners were killed by a single bullet to the back of the head, their bodies thrown carelessly into huge pits dug beforehand. The locations of these executions were kept strictly secret, far from any witnesses. The killing process was brutally efficient, and each day hundreds of prisoners lost their lives in this cruel manner. The choice of execution methods was not random. Soviet soldiers used German-made pistols to make it appear as though Nazi Germany was responsible. This decision would later allow Stalin's regime to create a false story and blame their wartime enemy, Germany for these horrific murders. They meticulously buried victims along with their personal items, unknowingly preserving evidence that would later reveal the truth behind these atrocities. By mid-1940, nearly 22,000 Polish prisoners had been systematically executed by the Soviet Union. The tragedy of the Polish prisoners reveals the brutal reality of life under Stalin's regime. For 3 long years, the fate of the Polish prisoners executed by the Soviet Union remained completely unknown to the outside world. The first signs of the Katyn Massacre came to light in April 1943, not because of Soviet openness, but rather by accident. At this time, German forces had pushed deep into Soviet territory, capturing areas previously controlled by Stalin's regime. Near the town of Smolensk in western Russia, German soldiers stumbled upon a disturbing discovery: large mass graves hidden in the Katyn forest. What they uncovered shocked even battle-hardened troops. Thousands of bodies buried in huge pits, stacked upon each other in multiple layers. The Germans, quickly realizing the potential propaganda advantage, invited an international medical commission, including neutral doctors from various countries, to investigate the gruesome discovery. The commission examined the graves carefully, performing detailed forensic analyses. What they found was undeniable proof of a massive crime. Bodies were clearly identified as Polish soldiers and officers, with military uniforms and personal belongings still intact. Many of the victims had their hands bound behind their backs and showed clear signs of being shot at close range in the back of the head. The investigations revealed another critical fact. The executions took place in 1940, when the area was still firmly controlled by the Soviet Union. The forensic evidence, including newspapers, diaries, and letters found in the pockets of victims, proved the killings could not have been committed by the Germans, as Soviet propaganda later claimed. The international doctors confirmed conclusively that these were deliberate executions carried out systematically and methodically by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the Soviet Union immediately denied responsibility. Stalin's regime launched an aggressive propaganda campaign accusing Nazi Germany of committing the massacre after occupying the area. Soviet authorities went to extraordinary lengths to cover up the truth, even staging fake investigations to produce falsified evidence and testimonies. They threatened and intimidated local witnesses who knew the truth, silencing anyone who might contradict their official version of events. However, the truth could not stay buried forever. Starting in the 1980s, the policy of glasnost, or openness, under Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev began to change things slowly. In 1986, Gorbachev allowed a commission to investigate what he called blank spots in Soviet Polish history. Public pressure for answers grew steadily, and in 1990, after 50 years of denial, the Soviet Union finally admitted responsibility for the massacre. On April 13, 1990, Soviet President Gorbachev officially handed over documents to Polish authorities acknowledging that the NKVD, under Stalin's direct orders, carried out the Katyn executions. The Soviet government described Katyn as one of the worst crimes committed under Stalin's rule, expressing deep regret for the tragedy. This admission was a significant step forward, allowing families of victims and the Polish nation to finally begin openly mourning and remembering those who had suffered such injustice.